All right. Hello everyone. Welcome to the first talk of the 2023-2024 OCHS Virtual Winter Speaker Series. My name is Ben Falter, and I'm the Director of Education at the Ontario County Historical Society in Canandaigua. Before I turn things over to Ansley, our wonderful presenter today, I just have a couple of quick announcements. First, this speaker series highlights topics related to recreation to coincide with our current exhibit, Let's Go Have Fun. So, if you have not already visited the exhibit, it will be closing in late April 2024 to make way for our next annual exhibit. So if you're in the Canandaigua area, definitely consider stopping by OCHS to check it out. Information about the Historical Society can be found on our website, and you should find a link to our website in the description of this talk. If you have not already looked into the upcoming talks in the series, I would obviously encourage you to do so, and you can find all the information about our upcoming talks on our website as well. And finally, thank you for tuning in this afternoon. If you have any questions or comments during the talk, you may type them in the live chat, and I will pass them on to our speaker during a few minutes of Q&A at the end of the talk. You can also access video playback of this talk after it concludes using the same link you're using to tune in right now. But without further ado, allow me to briefly introduce our speaker tonight. Ansley Jemison is the Cultural Liaison at Ganondagan State Historic Site, as well as the host and producer of the Original Peoples podcast. Ganondagan is a National Historic Landmark and the only historic site in New York dedicated to a Native American theme. Their grounds span 569 acres, include walking trails, full-size Seneca Bark Longhouse, Seneca Art and Culture Center, which tells the story of Haudenosaunee contributions to art, culture, and society, and more. And the Original Peoples podcast focuses on podcasting through an Indigenous lens, sharing stories and culture through Indigenous voices. So you should be able to find links to both Ganondagan and Ansley's podcast in the description of this talk below, so that you can learn more about both of those as well. But I will go ahead and turn things over to Ansley, so go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Can everybody hear me out there? Thumbs up, yes. Okay, so Nyawaiskano Swagwego. My name is Ansley Jemison. Onondawaga niya Nekononge Titoyo Negyaso Titoyo Nekononge Ganondagan. So my name is Ansley Jemison. I'm a member of the Onondawatka people, the people of the Great Hill, the Seneca people. And I'm originally from Western New York, I guess you would say, the Allegheny territory down near Salamanca, New York. So it's the furthest point west for our territories, and it's in the southern tier of New York State. I had the good fortune of growing up between my territory, the Allegheny, as well as New York City, and then later on living at Ganondagan, pretty much through my years of high school and college and all of that. And so it was a pretty unique upbringing, I guess you would say, having the opportunity to, first live on territory, be surrounded by my community and my family. All of my, family and relatives were within like a stone's throw of each other. And I'm really the kind of the product of it takes a village to raise a child, I guess, sort of thing. And it was a really unique and interesting experience to grow up in that way. I was kind of raised in a family where my mother's side were Christian, and for me, it never felt as though that was who I was. I didn't really feel as though that's where I kind of fit in. I remember being a kid and like going to church, and seeing like this guy like stuck up on this like cross and like having blood coming out of his hands, and most of the people that were in the church were non-native people, and I was used to being around more indigenous people, native people. And so being a little brown kid sitting in this like congregation of all these white people, excuse me for lack of a better term, I just never really felt like I fit in there. But down the road from where I grew up and where I lived was our longhouse, and that's where our traditional ceremonial practices and things like that happen and take place. And after a while, I fought tooth and nail against, my family, and I didn't want to go to church. And I would end up going to the longhouse and being in there by myself, essentially. and learning, from elders and adults and things like that, and then other kids, that I knew, going to school and things like that. And so that was always something that I was, much more drawn to and wanting to know more about. And, because of residential schools and colonization and things like that, in a lot of ways, our communities and our territories were deeply impacted, in terms of losing identity and losing culture and losing the language and things like that. And so, unfortunately, I'm not fluent in the language. I understand probably a lot more of it than I can speak. And having spent the time that I did and grew up at Ganondagan, I was able to kind of understand and wrap my head around more of a historical perspective and kind of understand why it is where we are today and how we are today, how we're situated on these reservations, how we're moved out of like the original places and territories that we're in. Ontario County would have been, really like the home base for the Seneca people in a lot of ways, traditionally and originally. And so when I moved, up to Victor, to live with my father at Ganondagan, I had grown up, living on the reservation, having a lacrosse stick and playing lacrosse and things like that. But my territory, my community didn't have an organized team. And so the Cattaraugus territory, which is about an hour away, had, lacrosse, and it was much more active and much more prevalent there. But always having like a wooden lacrosse stick and having a stick in my hand from the time of childhood, I understood the game. I understood how to, pass and catch and how to throw and things like that. But I really wasn't as familiar with, I guess you would say, organized sport and organized lacrosse. And when I moved to Canandaigua and actually went, or when I lived in Victor, I went to Canandaigua High School because Victor at the time didn't have lacrosse. And the football team in Canandaigua was a little bit better. And football was actually kind of more of my go-to sport. I grew up with that. I'd been playing that since I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. There was a big tradition of that on our territory. And that's kind of what kids grew up doing, was playing football. And so that being the case, I wanted to go to a school that had, good athletics, and Canandaigua was a good school. And later on, I kind of realized the significance of the fact that, like, here's a Jemison who's, a ninth generation descendant of Mary Jemison going to school at Canandaigua, this place where the Canandaigua Treaty was signed with George Washington, the significance of all of that, and just sort of how interesting and odd all of that stuff kind of came together. But again, just being a kid and being a student, I really didn't, I was just trying to be a kid. I was just trying to be a student athlete. And it wasn't until later on that people kind of caught on to the fact that, like, oh, you're like a native kid and you're playing a native sport, you're playing lacrosse, and, you're in this town. And there was all these sort of like historical sort of things that were kind of coming together in these, things. And excuse me, it was really amazing to see the exposure and I guess sort of the attention that I started to garner. And then later on, when I was about 15 years old, 16 years old, I tried out for our Iroquois Nationals, our U19 Iroquois Nationals team. And that's our native national team that competes against the USA, Canada, Japan, Australia, and England at the time. And this was back in 1992. And I was selected to the team and was kind of like a utility type player, more of a midfielder, and played defense, could play with a long stick, could play with a short stick. And, just having sort of athleticism from, all of my previous sports that I had grown up playing and things like that, I really took to the game of lacrosse and then the organized aspect of it. And this was the first time that I really got to play with like a team full of like other kids like me, growing up in Canandaigua. I was the only native kid, prior to like living in Canandaigua and Victor and things like that. I was the only kid, only native kid on my football teams and things like that. I was growing up in, down in New Jersey. I lived down in New Jersey for a brief time, 2 years. And most of the athletes that were on my team were Hispanic or African American, or, maybe Italian or Irish or whatever their backgrounds may have been. And I was the only native kid. So I always had this sort of like weird identity crisis, but I was always a competitor, and I think that sport was always that thing for me that helped me pass, in a lot of ways. I didn't have to do a lot of explaining. I didn't have to kind of be super educated in terms of like what it meant to be a native person or an indigenous person. I could actually just be like a good athlete and people would just kind of leave me alone. But as I kind of grew into myself a little bit and kind of had a little bit more understanding, and then having this experience with the Iroquois Nationals, this real reverence and pride started to develop in me that this is our sport. This is our game. This was a sport that was originated by our people. And I grew up hearing the stories of like how the game was gifted to us by the creator and it was meant to be played for his enjoyment. And it could be played as like, and having the ceremonial context of the game as well. This could be played as like a medicine sport or a medicine game and could be used to heal people in the community. And so, you may hear this, a bit if you've ever, paid much attention to like, lacrosse in recent years. We've had like the Thompson brothers have been very successful. Cody Jamison has been very successful. There's been a number of, really talented lacrosse players that have competed at Division I level. And oftentimes, people go in and want to interview these guys and hear them talk about what does it mean to be a Native American lacrosse player playing at Albany or Syracuse or wherever these schools are that they're at. And, they're all able to give these sort of answers that, it is a medicine game. It's very important in our community and all those sort of things. And all of that is true, but later on, as I kind of like, went and did my college years, I played at Syracuse. I had the opportunity to play for the, nationally ranked Syracuse Orangemen back in the late 90s, I guess it was. Most of the earth was covered with water at that point, I think. But it was a really amazing experience to be there. It was myself and another Native player, Marshall Abrams, that were able to compete for Syracuse. And there was a few other Native guys that were playing Division I lacrosse at that point. And, it was really few and far between, that Native guys were actually getting these opportunities and getting these experiences. And then there was like a wave of kids, maybe another like 8-10 years after we were out of school. Now this wave of like really highly skilled, highly talented young people were coming up through and really kind of eclipsed anything that any of us had ever done on the field, And it was really inspiring and really amazing. But for me, after I graduated from Syracuse University, we went to 4 Final Fours. We went to 2 national championships. I never won a ring. I never won the national championship. And, for all those years throughout my, formidable years in high school and things like that, like my identity was based around like, lacrosse, and even parts of my indigenous identity was based around like my lacrosse abilities and prowess and, I guess sort of somewhat fame, I guess, at that point. And I didn't really quite know what to do with myself. Like here I'm done with college. I now have this college degree. 9/11 had just happened. And, I was kind of wondering like, well, now what do I do with myself? What's this next chapter of my life? And how do I turn the page from this? Because, when everything's built up and, grown around this, and this is before like even pro lacrosse was even really kind of a thing. Um, I just really had this sort of identity crisis and I didn't feel like a man in a lot of ways. And so I just kind of said, you know what, I'm going to check out of the world for a little bit. And I moved to Taos, New Mexico, of all places, which is kind of like the end of the earth in a lot of ways. But I did a lot of soul searching out there and I did a lot of like growing and sort of challenging myself and learned a lot of different things and worked with my hands, got into the trades and things like that, built houses, learned how to build adobe houses, learned how to build earth ships. Did a little bit of solar power work while I was out there, did some property management, worked in a ski valley, a ski resort, and really kind of got a master's degree, I think, in life. And then, as things kind of do happen, you have a breakup with a person and then you got to leave town because it's sort of a small town. And I wanted another adventure. So I took on the opportunity to go and teach English in Brazil. And, I just traveled down to Brazil and went there for a year and, ended up teaching and doing a bunch of stuff down there, traveling, and then ended up back at my parents' house in Victor on the couch, living at my parents' house. And I was just like, what has happened to me? Like, I've gone off and done all these amazing things and traveled the world and seen and challenged myself and did all this stuff. And, here I was like back on my parents' couch and starting out at square one again. And my former high school lacrosse coach, John Johnson, was coaching at St. John Fisher College, and he found out that I was back in town and asked me if I'd be interested in coming to help out as a coach. And I kind of laughed at first because, St. John Fisher didn't have a lacrosse team at all, and I didn't know really much about it. And it was a new program and things. But I took on the experience and the opportunity because it was like a great opportunity to get back in contact with my high school coach. And it turned out to be probably one of the most rewarding opportunities I could have ever had. I got to work with three retired Section 5 legends of the game of lacrosse. Randy Garrett, who was the longtime coach at Fairport High School. Um, I got to coach with obviously John Johnson, and then also Mark Rice, who was a longtime coach at Penfield High School. And then another gentleman by the name of Jeff Schwartz was a longtime goalie coach at Irondequoit High School. So these are kind of like, pretty big deal programs and pretty pivotal programs in and around the Section 5 area. And I got to learn from these guys and spend hours watching video and learning how to coach and learning how to become a coach. And in that time, I was working with a friend of mine, Gaywa Schindler, who's from the Onondaga territory. He's Oneida, but he grew up in Onondaga, and he wanted to put on these youth tournaments and things like that. And so I said, okay, well, let me get back involved with some, the game a little bit. Let me do some of this. And so right away, like lacrosse sort of became my identity. I became the coach. Then I was organizing these tournaments and doing different things and helping like Native youth, grow and develop in the game. And it became very rewarding. And then an opportunity come up for me to take a job down at Cornell University, and I had to leave St. John Fisher, and it was really difficult because I'd done 5 years there. I had recruited a bunch of kids to come there. I was really wanting to like move into like maybe like a head coaching position, and this new role and this new position that I was going to be taking was going to take me completely away from the game of lacrosse and kind of maybe focus more on the academic side of the college, and university and things like that. And it was to become the residence hall director at Aguego, which is the American Indian Program House down at Cornell University. And it was the very first uh, residence hall dedicated to the culture and identity of Indigenous people. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was going to be living on campus with a bunch of college kids at Cornell University. Truth be told, I couldn't even get into Cornell University when I was applying to college. And next thing you know, I'm going to be down there advising and working with these young people. I was intimidated. I was scared, and some of the first things that I had to go through when I went to Cornell was, all of the training and the teaching and stuff like that. And then came, me going in to have teachings and trainings on microaggressions and, language and how to speak and how to talk. Now, I want to remind you that I had just come out of like being a lacrosse coach for the past 5 years, and locker room talk was a big part of my vernacular at that time. And so I really had to kind of change and shift gears quite a bit. When I got to Cornell University, I didn't have the right clothes to wear. I went to a secondhand store in Ithaca. Unfortunately, some corpulent, guy must have passed away because all of his dress suits and sports coats and things like that, and ended up at this thrift store. So I was able to buy up a bunch of kind of, affordable clothing just so I could kind of look the part, I guess, while I was there. And I did a lot of learning, while I was there, and learned a lot more about Indigenous cultures, Indigenous peoples, from different territories, different communities, and while still being involved with, the youth development of the lacrosse program and things like that, where eventually I was asked to apply for the executive director role for the Iroquois Nationals, which is our men's and our national lacrosse team. And I got the okay from Cornell that I was going to be kind of doing double duty. This position wasn't a paid position; it was a volunteer position, and that they would turn it into sort of my research or my summertime work, that they could kind of justify me doing community outreach type of stuff. And so I got the opportunity to work with the Iroquois Nationals, and the very first experience that I had was in 2009, 2010, when our national team was set to travel to the UK and travel to England. And initially, I was hired on as like a lacrosse coach for that team, and eventually, I was elevated to the general manager. And the general manager, who was in the position prior to that, had resigned. He was frustrated, resigned, and then I was cast into this like this opportunity to like, okay, you're gonna take over the reins here, and you're gonna take this team to the UK. Now we travel on a Haudenosaunee passport, which is our Iroquois issued passport, and it's issued through the Onondaga Nation over near Syracuse, New York. And it's required that all of our players that compete on the national team have to compete and travel with our passport. And unfortunately, at that time, our passports didn't meet the security requirements that, UK or, England had expected. And so, unfortunately, we weren't able to travel to the UK and compete in the World Championships. And this was a devastating experience for me. It was very difficult. It was very, a huge slap in the face, because again, knowing the history of the Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois people, and their relationships to England, the treaties that we have with the United States, the treaties that we had with the UK and the British people and things like that, we were allies at different times. And to have the door shut in our face and not being able to go and compete in this World Lacrosse Championship while they're playing our game and we're the indigenous people, the originators of the game, and we're not allowed to go and compete in this tournament because of our passports. And it turned into a huge media swirl. We were stuck down in New York City. We were there for about 5 days, and we were running out of money. I was trying to keep, I guess our routines and things like that as normal as possible for the players and the athletes, and in hopes that things would get cleared up and maybe some of this red tape would kind of go away and we would get to be able to travel eventually. And eventually the game started without us, and we were so far behind that we were never going to catch up. So we had to make the decision that it just wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to work out. And at the time, the head of state, or the Secretary of State, was Hillary Clinton, and she had issued the sort of this idea that, like, well, we could have this like one-time waiver that we could travel, and we would be able to go. But the challenge then became that because we draw players from both the Canadian and the American side, but yet we don't identify as Canadian citizens or American citizens. We identify as Haudenosaunee people, because when you sign a treaty with a nation, it's a nation to nation relationship that you have with these people. So when they were asking about, like, well, how many Canadian born players do you have? We said none. Well, what does that mean? You have people that live on the other side. Yes, that is the case. That is true. But we're all Haudenosaunee people. We didn't want to separate ourselves, and we didn't want to kind of have that divide. And then each of these sort of nations having this ability to kind of determine who was then their citizens. Because if you take away that citizenship, then we are no longer the Iroquois nationals or the Haudenosaunee nationals. We're now the Canadian Iroquois nationals, or the Canadian or the American Iroquois nationals. So this was a stance that we had to take. And this became a conversation around, sovereignty, really, and right to self-determination and those sort of things. And it's interesting today that, Indigenous people are limited in terms of their ability to travel internationally as their own people. We've now had to become like, declared either citizens or take up citizenship within the United States. And this is something that we still have our own culture, we still have our own identity, we still have our own languages, we still have our own teachings and practices and things like that. We want to retain who we are, and it's important that our young people know who we are and who they are. And so oftentimes this lacrosse team becomes this vehicle for diplomacy, and I think most of you may understand that sport is someplace where we can all kind of come together, and on the playing field and things like that, all things are kind of equal in a lot of ways because we're all out there competing. It really, even though we are wearing different colors and wearing different identities and flags and things like that, we're all competing for the same thing, and we're all sort of like-minded in the way that we want to play the game the right way. And so the Iroquois Nationals become sort of this political pawn at times, which is very challenging and difficult. But at the same time, it's very necessary because it also does help people recognize and understand Indigenous people from a different perspective. Most people don't really have common interactions with Indigenous people. The most times you're ever going to see an Indigenous person might be, on the side of a football helmet, or, as a mascot or something like that, or in a history book or something, or maybe in like in a spaghetti Western, or maybe today you watch Reservation Dogs on Netflix or something, or Hulu or whatever that is. Um, but oftentimes people don't have normal interactions with Indigenous people, and they don't even realize that Indigenous people still exist, for one thing. And so the Iroquois Nationals, the Haudenosaunee Nationals, kind of stand as that beacon of hope and that opportunity to further discussion, further the conversation around Indigenous identities, Indigenous sovereignty, and things like that. And it's through the vehicle of sport. There's all these different nations. There's 82 or 83 different countries that are now playing the game of lacrosse, where, in 2028, the game of lacrosse has actually been included in the Olympics as a provisional sport, and that it's actually going to be back in the Olympics for the first time. And, oh, by the way, the Iroquois Nationals are kind of in a fight for their life to actually even be included to be able to compete in those games because we don't have an International Olympic Committee, the IOC. So here it is again. We're playing an indigenous sport. We're playing the game that, and we're number 2 and number 3 in the world. There's 2 versions of the game that are played at the world level. There's the box lacrosse version, which is inside of a hockey rink on a turf floor. And then there's the field lacrosse version where most people may be more familiar with the game. And so we're number 2 in the box lacrosse version of it, and we're number 3 in the field lacrosse version. And it flip-flops between Canada and the US, who's number 1. And then we're usually the bronze medal winner. And that sort of happened in the years that I was, a part of the organization, that we started to become and started to rise up into these ranks. Now, I don't take credit for that. I think it's a testament as to what I had mentioned before, that there was sort of this flood and this rush of like this level of talent that was coming out. And, the game had just really changed and shifted, in a big way. And we had these amazing athletes that have really been carrying the torch for our program. And they've been helping us a lot, uplifting the visibility, growing the game. They're great spokespeople, for the game. And they're also great spokespeople for, again, Indigenous identities, Indigenous cultures, and things like that. So a game that I want to talk about that was, certainly important and, really kind of pivotal and actually was one of my last trips with the Haudenosaunee Nationals, was a trip that we were taking to Israel. And Ben, if I can just have you come back on for a quick second. I don't know. I just want to see if I can do this share screen thing so I can maybe.
Yep.
Are people listening? Are people here?
Yeah, we've got a couple people tuning in. Yeah.
All right. I'm kind of sitting here talking to just you and me, or it's like a blank screen. I can't see the people that I'm talking to.
Yeah. No. We've got a couple people tuning in, so you're good.
Okay. So let me see if I can do a shared screen. Is that where is that in the?
Should be on the bottom.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yep. Shared screen. Okay. Can you see this?
Not yet.
Oh, hang on.
Oh.
Are you seeing it?
Yes, now we can see it. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. And I'm off to the side there. Okay.
All right.
So this was a little PowerPoint that I had prepared a while ago. And the only reason why I'm bringing this up really is just so you can kind of get some visual imagery of the team and not have to look at my head. So they're far better looking than I am. I have to say that. So let me just see if I can, let's see here. Slideshow, play from start. Okay, there we go. I got it. Okay, so sport as a vehicle for diplomacy. Iroquois Nationals lacrosse and international travel. The Iroquois Nationals lacrosse team's incredible journey to Israel. So yeah, we were invited to go and travel to Israel for the World Lacrosse Championships, and what an amazing place. I have to say that it was a very challenging experience to get this team to go to Israel. We had a number of people that were behind us and were very adamant in making sure that we were able to go and travel and compete. It went all the way up as far as Benjamin Netanyahu, that was actually having to give the okay and signing off to that it was okay for us to travel on our Haudenosaunee passports. But why this happened and why this came about was that Team Israel won the bid to host the World Championships. And we were friendly with the then director of the Israeli national team. And he was very adamant and very respectful and thought that it was important that we include the Iroquois Nationals and that we should be there. And so he had on his board of directors connections to the Israeli government and people who were very interested in making sure that this could happen. And part of this was because of the fact that earlier that year, they were supposed to host a soccer friendly in Israel. And Lionel Messi, part of the team, Argentina, refused to go there, refused to go and compete. So Argentina then backed out of this friendly. And, Messi had made this decision based on some political feelings that he had around, maybe some of the dealings with Israel and things like that. And he didn't agree with maybe some of their politics. And so he decided that it wasn't someplace that he wanted to go. And so Israel took this as a very heavy slight, and they really didn't appreciate this. And so because they were going to be hosting a world event like this World Lacrosse Championships, They wanted to make sure that it was ultra secure, that it was very safe for people to travel there, and that this was going to be a spectacular event. And you know, we faced some opposition on our end. We had people who were obviously advising us that we shouldn't go to Israel. It was a dangerous place. That it was a very politically, it was sort of a not good look for us as well. We had people from Palestine, reaching out to us and saying that we're siding with the settler colonial state, and they wanted to kind of, I guess, compare their situation with what indigenous people experienced here with colonization, here in the Americas, and so that we should be siding with the Palestinians, that we shouldn't go there, out of protest. And having had the experience in 2010 where we were denied access to, the UK because of our passports and not being able to go and compete. And when we went, or when we weren't able to go, we were charged for meals that we didn't eat. We were charged for housing that we didn't live in. And then we got fined by World Lacrosse on top of all of that, for missing the tournament. And this was all because of a passport issue. So in my mind, having lived through that and the trauma of all of that, I didn't want to experience that again. And so I was very adamant about making sure that we made these world championships. And oh, by the way, World Lacrosse was threatening us that if we didn't make it to the world championships, that the Haudenosaunee Nationals were then going to be removed from World Lacrosse and we wouldn't be able to compete internationally anymore. So on my watch, that would have been the situation where 2010 we couldn't go. Now here we are going into Israel and we're not going to be able to compete, and we could potentially be booted out of international lacrosse completely. That wasn't something I wanted to have my name next to, and I didn't want that to be the narrative around my experience and my time with the Iroquois Nationals. So I had to go around to our communities and I had to talk to them and assure them that it was going to be safe and that it was going to be okay. But there was really no guarantees, because during that year there was a lot of things that were happening between Israel and Palestine. There was a lot of bombings and things like that. It was said to be a war zone, and look at it today, what's going on in the situation over there. But as much as possible, we had to be apolitical, and we couldn't make any statements either way, siding with Israel or siding with, the Palestinian people. But yet we had to go and basically make a stand to make and be present as indigenous people. So for me, I was getting the door shut in my face by each of our communities telling us that we shouldn't go there. I shouldn't take our best athletes, our leaders, our young men, putting them in danger like this. What's wrong with you? All sorts of things. And man, I was starting to question myself, like, what am I doing? What am I trying to do here? And I had to start to think about, the cultural teachings that come out of the game of lacrosse and what that medicine game conversation is about. And it was said that the game of lacrosse could often be played, in place of war, in place of bloodshed. A big part of the Haudenosaunee people and the Iroquois people is this message of peace. So you see in the middle of my screen here, you see this the purple flag there. Well, what that represents is the Hiawatha Belt. And if you were to like drape that over, the state of New York, each of those symbols that are on that belt there represent the nations within the Confederacy. So furthest to the west is my nation, which is the Seneca Nation. So that would be, to the screen left, I guess, is that little box there would be the Seneca Nation. Next would come the Cayuga Nation. In the middle, where that sort of tree-looking design is where the Onondaga Nation is. That's our central fire of our political, I guess, headquarters would be. Next would then come the Oneida Nation, and then the Mohawk Nation. And the keepers of the eastern door and the keepers of the western door are the Senecas of the western door, the eastern door is the Mohawk people. And so we have this responsibility politically within our Confederacy, is that we have responsibility for protecting, these doorways and these entries into, our central fire, into into where the Onondaga Nation is. So, um, So here we were traveling, and they're going to play this game of lacrosse. 82 countries are going to play this game of lacrosse, play our medicine game. So I had to think that, okay, well, we can bring this message of peace to a place like Israel. And we have a wampum belt called the dish with one spoon. And I'm going to go ahead and, fast forward ahead of my PowerPoint here just a little bit. So bear with me for a second. There's an image of the passport that I had talked about. There's one of our players. He had just gotten through customs. And there he was. We traveled with our passports, which was pretty amazing. So this wampum belt that I'm talking about is this white belt that's up in the top right corner here, and in the middle there's like a purple sort of rounded dish. And so that's the dish that we're talking about, the dish with one spoon. And this idea was a treaty that was signed amongst all of the nations within the Great Lakes. And this was during the time of colonization that we had realized that through our trading partnerships and through all the different things that were happening, we were seeing that resources and things like that were becoming depleted in and around the Great Lakes. And that we had also recognized that the Great Lakes were essentially, our supermarket, or where we were going to get all of our goods and, trade items and things like that. And so we had to take this concept, this an idea that we're all going to eat from the same dish and we're going to use a spoon so that when we take from it, we don't harm or injure or, accidentally hurt somebody. And we can take from it what we need and leave enough for everybody else, right? So this is sort of a conservationist, or maybe even sort of I guess you would even say like, a green movement type of, message, I guess you could take from it. But then politically, you can also think about the fact that like here we were in Israel around Jerusalem, and this is a place where three major religions take, this is a very sacred site to three major religions. You have Israel or the Judaism, you have Christianity, and then you have Islam. And so is it the case that we're bringing the medicine game, which could be played in place of conflict and war to settle disputes. The indigenous people, the originators of the game, bringing this game, but then also bringing this message of peace and this concept and idea that we can all eat from the same dish and leave enough for each other so that everybody can still take from this place and have it still be sacred to them. And so, as I had mentioned before, we weren't allowed to talk about any kind of political sides or any kind of like make any kind of statements or anything like that. But the symbolism, the symbology, the mnemonics of our wampum belts had this ancient sort of codification or codified message in it about peace, about conservation, about thinking about others, about reciprocity, and about connection to, a place and our surroundings and how those resources are valuable and important to us. Well, rather than saying something outwardly, I was able to put it on the back of our helmets. And in the previous pictures, you can see we had it on the front of our shirts. And this dish with one spoon was this concept and this idea. And so for me, before I had brokered the deal that we were going to come as a team, I made, the Israeli national team guarantee that we were going to have an opportunity to work with Arab and Israeli kids and share our message of peace and also share the message of in the game of lacrosse with them so that they had it from the first hand of what the originators of the sport believed to understand about the game and the importance of this game, and then also this message of peace and this concept of peace that sport can bring people together and we can share ideas and share thoughts, break bread together, compete, and respect one another, but also leave enough space for other people to have their own beliefs. And we could all take from these places and have these experiences together. So, this is, some of the stuff and some of the work that we've been doing. And again, as I had mentioned, that like, lacrosse being this vehicle for diplomacy, it's very difficult, because in a lot of ways, Australia, the United States, Canada, the UK, a lot of these places don't want to, reconcile the fact that their colonialism or their settler colonialism has been impactful on indigenous people, and that through the theft of land and through the cultural genocides and things like that have occurred and that have happened along the way, they don't want to come to terms with those facts, and that it's a very difficult thing to talk about. Is that, yeah, we stole your land and we forced your culture to into exile and things like that. It's a very difficult conversation to have. And the fact that here we are, this beacon of hope and this like beacon of like, indigenous identity, still competing at the world level, we're still trying to be a voice for the voices unheard. And the voices unheard don't only, speak to, just the other indigenous people throughout the world, but the faces that are unborn, the indigenous, 7 generations down the road of the indigenous people. So the work that we do and the thought that we put into, like, when we make decisions, we want to understand what is our decision making now going to affect 7 generations down the road. And so this is a sort of a concept and an idea that we have to live with. And that's what we think about when we think about our relationship to the environment, when we think about our relationship to other people. And so how can we be as a people come together and live on this thing, this place called Earth, Mother Earth? How can we all come together and still find commonalities and find similarities within each other as opposed to the differences that we have today? And so I think that, looking at the current situation that's happening over in, throughout the world, not just in Israel and Palestine right now, but throughout the world, there's conflicts, there's things that are happening, there's things that are brewing, indigenous cultures, indigenous ideals always been forced down, in favor of capitalism and things like that. And so is it time that we need to start to hear indigenous voices? Is it time to hear indigenous stories? And is it time that we all kind of figure out, like, man, we're all in this finite space. How do we all live with each other? How are we going to make this place better for the 7 generations down the road? And what's going to be left? Are we going to have a nuclear war and then everything's going to, pick back up after that? I mean, I don't know how many people want to survive a nuclear holocaust, you know, but can the game of lacrosse be this vehicle that can kind of help find commonalities, find similarities? So it's important, again, that the Iroquois Nationals or the Haudenosaunee Nationals are included in the Olympics, because we are that voice for the indigenous people. And that was part of my voice to, like, the Palestinian people that didn't want us to go there, who were saying that we were, similar indigenous people, but yet we're siding with the colonizers. And I just wanted to let them know that presence can be protest. And just by being there, if we weren't there, then we were eliminated. We were taken out of the conversation. But us being there and being that sore thumb, and being as flashy and cool and, and being the originators of the game, the rest of the world loves the Iroquois Nationals. I mean, when we go into a championship game against Team USA, Team Canada, everybody's rooting for the Iroquois Nationals. Everybody's rooting for the Haudenosaunee Nationals to finally knock those teams off, because we're the underdog. We're the little guy. Our pool of world-class lacrosse players, is probably about 100 guys. And this team has to be comprised of 25 players. And so anybody that's a world-class player, we have probably anywhere between 100 to 45, world-class athletes. And to get down to our best 25, it's very challenging. It's very difficult. A lot of politics go into that. If you've ever been around organized sport, but I've been very proud of the efforts. I've been very proud of the young men who have competed for the Haudenosaunee Nationals, the voices and the beacon of hope that they can be, the leaders that they can be for young people in and around our communities. And also for me, what I started to realize was that anything that I would put on the Iroquois Nationals, our uniforms, our helmets, whatever it was, we could start storytelling and we could start becoming educators of people in our communities. There was a lot of people that didn't know about that story about the dish with one spoon. By us putting it on the back of our helmet, then I saw clothing lines start to happen. I saw the sort of new, resurgence of, like, the importance of that belt showing up on t-shirts and, bumper stickers and all sorts of things. People now, again, oh, the Iroquois Nationals made this thing cool, so this must be important. I want to be a part of something like that. But in reality, it was a part of their culture all along. We just brought it back to the forefront and just let people know that, hey, this is something that's important to our identity, and this is something to our storytelling that we can share with the world, and that it's an important and compelling story that, through the game of lacrosse and through the visibility of our players in our program, we can educate the rest of the world about indigenous storytelling and indigenous ideals and things like that. So this is just some history of the game. Early competition that happened between Canadian national teams and early Mohawk teams up and around the Quebec area, Montreal. This is a game now with England and the Iroquois Nationals, the Haudenosaunee Nationals. Excuse me. Anytime we play England now since 2010, we like to take it out on them a little bit harder, just because of the fact that they denied our access, in 2010. So there's always that intimidation factor when we go out there that we want to let England know that we didn't forget about you guys in 2010, and we're gonna play a little bit extra hard for you guys, just so you know that you need to respect us as a people and respect us as a competitor. So that's just one of our things that kind of happened there. Um, let's see. So again, here's international travel. There's the passport that's issued through the Confederacy. Here's Lyle Thompson. He's one of our top players competing. He's a very famous lacrosse player today, competing against Team Puerto Rico when we were over in Israel. This picture here, that's the next one with the belt and then the eagle staff there, and then the wampum belts. This was when we hosted the World Lacrosse Championships, the World Indoor Lacrosse Championships at the Onondaga Nation. And I was the executive director at that time, and we actually brought the game of lacrosse home for the first time and was able to welcome, all of the teams that were competing in box lacrosse to our central fire, to our, traditional territory, and got to put on a pretty amazing game. And we finished, we won the silver that year. We lost to Team Canada. We played an amazing game inside the Carrier Dome at Syracuse University. We set up a box lacrosse facility the same way that they set up the basketball court inside the dome. And it was amazing to see that. And that was probably one of the largest crowds to witness a lacrosse game inside the Carrier Dome. And it was really awesome to be a part of that, and and to have that be the Iroquois Nationals playing on home soil, home turf, and at my alma mater at Syracuse University. So that was kind of a really cool experience for me. So these are some of the older teams that were traveling and competing, throughout the years. They're kind of our heritage and sort of our people that we look back to, in terms of the foundation of the game. In this picture here, we have our men's team that competed in 2014 in Denver. That's the guy celebrating in the black jerseys there. That was the first year that we were allowed back into international competition after being excluded in 2010. We were playing in Denver. And this is the first highly visible, highly televised broadcast that was happening, and it was important that the Iroquois Nationals were there, and ESPN of all people was able to kind of come to our savior here, because when we didn't go in 2010, they relegated us to the bottom of the rankings. Here we had been number 3 or number 4 in the world, and then we got dropped all the way down to the bottom. And so they elevated Team Germany that was going to play in the blue division. And ESPN was like, look, nobody's going to want to tune into a blowout of Germany getting their doors blown off by, Team England or Team USA or Team Canada or whatever else. We need the number 3 team in the world to compete back in the blue division. And so the World Lacrosse realized and recognized that it was undue that we were punished and relegated in that way, and that, we should be back up in the blue division where we belonged. And so on the back of these helmets was actually a symbol of the passport, the seal that we have that represents the 50 chiefs of our Confederacy and the clan animals and things like that. And it was sort of a statement piece for me that I would make this helmet, and that I would put that logo or that seal on the back of our helmet, just to remind people that we're also a people as well, and that we have our own culture and we have our own symbology and stuff like that. And here's our passport, and this should be good enough for you guys to accept that we're a people, and we deserve to be able to travel internationally. This next picture is our young team. This is our U19s, our under 19 program. This team has been pretty amazing to watch. They've been able to knock off Team USA. We haven't beaten Canada with the U19s yet, but we've gotten as high as knocking off Team USA. And again, a very small player pool to be drawing from. 45 kids going up against the thousands of American players that they can draw from. And oh, by the way, like, all of their players that they pick for the U19s are all Division I college lacrosse players. We'll have high school kids. We'll have kids that maybe played some college lacrosse, and then there's some guys that maybe are Division I lacrosse players themselves. But again, we're very undermanned in a lot of ways. But skill wise and talent wise and things like that, we can compete at a pretty high level with Team USA. And this was at the World Lacrosse Championships up in British Columbia, up in Coquitlam, British Columbia, and pretty awesome to be a part of that team as well. So with that, I will say, we win, you win. So anytime the Iroquois Nationals are a part of the World Lacrosse Championships, it's more opportunity to see great lacrosse, to see the originators of the game compete and play. And then also it's an opportunity for Indigenous voices to be shared and to be heard. on a world stage. And so with that, I think I'll open it up to any questions if that makes sense, Ben.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat here on the YouTube live stream. There is a little bit of a latency between us and the folks watching on YouTube, so I will start things off with a question for you.
Sure.
So, you talked about U.S. and Canada and England sort of cultural genocide of Native peoples. Obviously, Native identity has endured despite those attempts. But my question is, what about Lacrosse specifically has allowed it to endure despite all of that? And I guess as an attached question, what what would you attribute its recent explosion in popularity to?
Um, it's a number of things I would say. I mean, I think that, it's one of the fastest growing sports in terms of participation and things like that, in and around the United States. I know that, there's a lot of other sports that are kind of growing, but I think as far as, the growth within, the collegiate level, within like the high school level and even the youth level, the game of lacrosse being an indigenous and the first America's first team sport,
Mm,
has become sort of like an everyman sort of sport, I think,
yeah,
or every person sort of sport, in that, you don't have to be 6'4" and run a 4.240 and things like that. Like there's a role and a place for everybody to kind of play, in the game. So it's a sport that's accessible for a lot of different people. Now, the only thing that I find that is maybe a little bit prohibitive is that and it's an expensive sport. It requires a lot of equipment,
yeah,
where basketball and soccer, all you need is a ball and a hoop or a
yeah,
ball and a net or something like that. And so that's why the popularity of that game has exploded, throughout the world. Lacrosse has been a little bit, a victim of the cost and the expensiveness of it all.
yeah,
And also the fact that, like, there's been a lot of sort of negative press around the game, I think, in a lot of ways, sort of this elitist sort of sport. And so it's also important, again, that, the indigenous people are there representing the game because we have the foundational understanding and the original sort of teachings about the game itself. And so, to kind of uncouch it from this sort of elitist sort of thing, it's important to understand that like the game's being played for a bigger reason, a bigger purpose. It's for the enjoyment of the creator, and we're here to play and compete, and do our best, before them.
yeah. Yeah, I to your point, I ran track and cross country in high school, so I was cheap. But my brother Daniel played lacrosse in middle and a little in high school, and he was the expensive one. So yeah, I totally get that.
Sure.
Um, I don't have any questions. I do have a message from the chat for you, from one of our viewers, Bonnie, who says that she loves the dish with the one spoon concept. Congratulations on your efforts to raise the profile of Indigenous sovereignty. Thank you for your presentation. And I would like to also echo Bonnie's sentiment. Great
Thank you.
presentation. Oh, I do have another question as well. One of the ongoing struggles you talked about was the difficulty for the Haudenosaunee Nationals, with passports and travel and, being allowed to compete in the Olympics
Yeah.
as a national team. What do you see as a way forward to make this process easier, I guess? Because right now it seems like you need to know someone, or make those connections.
Yeah, it's been a lot of that really. And fortunately, we've been able to kind of tug at some heartstrings at different times and people kind of get the idea that like, yeah, it's important that, you all travel and things like that. It's better for us to travel as a team as opposed to individuals. You're still going to be stopped at like at a consulate or something like that, or international travel. Like I couldn't just jump on a plane today and head to the UK with my passport, or head
Right.
to France or whatever else. They really give you kind of a hard time with that stuff still today. But I think that, the inclusion of us in the Olympics is going to raise that profile and maybe sort of
Yeah.
raise that a bit. Obviously after 9/11, heightened risks of like security and things like that around, air travel and things like that started to kind of ramp up. Obviously that was part of the issue that in 2010, because we didn't meet the security requirements. But again, it's been one of those things that, the Iroquois Nationals have been working, or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy has been working to, you know, keep our passports up to current standards. Having a barcode, having any kind of security metrics and things like that. We've hired an outside sourcing company and things like that to make sure that our passports meet these requirements. But it's one of those situations where there's a certain number of countries that sit on these boards that want to accept and allow passports and things like that, and they keep moving the goalposts every time we meet a
Right.
standard.
Right.
And those key countries are, again, the ones that I mentioned before: the UK, the United States, Canada, Australia, these places that have these settler colonial backgrounds and
Yeah.
histories. And they're the ones that don't want to have federally recognized or internationally recognized indigenous passports, because then they have to reckon with the idea that they stole a bunch of land, and there may be some place where we have to kind of reconcile or talk about what that was or what that is.
Yeah.
So we don't pretend to believe that this is going to be an easy thing, but
Right.
by allowing the game to happen and allowing it to be back in the Olympics, by an indigenous voice and indigenous presence to be there, it's going to raise the awareness, I think, and hopefully other indigenous people are inspired to start to ask for, this ability to be able to travel freely as indigenous people, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be under the settler colonial state.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ansley. Thank you, everybody who tuned in live. And hopefully, we'll see anybody tuned in live for the next talk in January. But otherwise, hope people enjoy their holidays, enjoy the New Year's, all of that good stuff. And thank you again, Ansley.
Thank you for the
And
opportunity.
yeah, absolutely.